Okay, there we go. It's working. All right, everyone. Welcome to the July 26th Wednesday occurrence of the Istio Combined Workgroup meeting. On our agenda, first up, we have John about a pull request.
Yeah, so this, it's not the most important thing. It's more of a cleanup, but I wanted to bring it up because the more eyes, the better, so we don't accidentally break something that I didn't think of. Some background on this: a long time ago, I guess it was done in 1.11, we moved a bunch of things from base to Istio D. This is like the service accounts and roles, I think just those, maybe some other things. And we kept the old ones around for backwards compatibility in case people were doing things with it. The normal Istio install doesn't actually use them, but for weird reasons, you could have hard-coded some assumptions or reused the role or service account for something else. I don't know, like weird cases. So we kept them around, and we've commented on there, like, don't use these, they're deprecated for backwards compatibility and whatnot. So this PR is just removing them, which at the very least for the normal cases should be perfectly fine. It's just a matter of if those weird cases that we haven't considered that are important enough that we shouldn't do this. Obviously, we have a release note that says we're doing this, so people may notice. But I want to check with people that they think we should do this and it's safe and whatnot.
So John, is the call just more reviewers on the CL?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just if anyone here knows of some reason why this may be a terrible idea, then please say something. If not, I think this is actually not waiting on approval. It's just waiting on me to feel comfortable removing the hold. So it doesn't technically need approvals, but now we have 17 people that I forced to review this. So yeah, go ahead, Kasim.
Yeah, I don't think it's a terrible idea. I don't know if it's the safest, but my preference would be to actually to do it for ambient, where we have a clear break in APIs and everything, and forget about the old one. I mean, I would much rather see a kind of future-proof, clean way that doesn't have backward incompatibilities, and it's a migration.
We don't really have like a different base chart for ambient, right?
We probably should have a base without. I mean, once the API is decided and we know what parts of the APIs are supported in API in ambient, it may be worth having a base that is specific to ambient, so people who just want to use ambient don't get APIs that don't work and validation. It's valid for ambient and so forth. I'm not saying we need to do it now, but you agree that if an API is not supported in ambient and the user is ambient only, there is no point to validate with the old one.
Yeah, I would agree, but that really only applies to the sidecar resource, so it's not a huge scope.
Yeah, I don't know. You saw the discussion yesterday on Gateway about using cell and other validation, so you don't require a complete validator. And
yeah, I mean,
if you use gamma only, yeah. So it may be worth investing in a clean base with only the clean API. I mean, Gateway Gamma already have CRDs that are external to us. For the few remaining Istio APIs that are going to be supported in ambient, it's better to validate for ambient. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I still believe ambient should have a clear base, but that doesn't mean that you cannot do some cleanup if you are bored for the old one.
Yeah, actually the motivation for this was that someone wanted to add some flags to optionally remove them because I think it adds some extended R back. And I don't like flags. so it led me to this.
Yeah, so I have a quick question, John, based on your comment. So let's assuming I'm a user, I'm using this legacy cluster role, right? So when I upgrade to a Istio version that have this removed, I mean, we're not going to manually, our upgrades are not going to remove them, right? They still have.
Both Helm and Istio Cuddle remove resources that have been removed when you do an install or upgrade.
So that's regardless when you use in place or revision base, it would remove for you automatically.
This is the base chart, so it's not related to revisions at all.
Okay.
And yes, both Helm and Istio remove resources. If you do a Helm template, pipe to kubectl apply, you'll probably keep the old ones around. But the two methods, Helm install and Istio install, will prune them out. As do, I think, most like Argo CD and Flux and whatnot.
Okay, sounds good. This is very helpful, by the way. I'm also thinking about adding a flag, so removing it would get rid of the needs. So we also have user asking for this too. And I don't know if it needs to necessarily tie to ambient, because sidecar users are asking for this today.
No, the ambient connection was to have a clean base that is far cleaner than just removing those flags. I mean, including CRD cleanup and additional stuff that is not used in ambient. And also, we also have a bunch of excessive permissions in the Istio chart, which are probably even more. I mean, the secret cross clusters and other things that, hopefully in ambient will not be used.
So regarding the secrets, yeah, I guess right now we have like the get, list, and watch permissions for secrets, and that's used, I think, for the Gateway API, right? For the Gateway API to be able to do reference grants. Is there a way to kind of not having the permissions if I'm not using that function? I don't think right now there's a flag for that.
You're muted, John.
John, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that's good because my response was kind of snarky. You can customize it with customize, but I don't think there's a flag built in on Helm.
Would if someone removes them, would Istio still be happy? I mean, because
no, it would definitely break.
So do we? I mean, the gateway API.
Only if you use that function, right?
But,
or would it break?
No, wait. Well,
like
whatever. Anything, it doesn't know what permission it has, so it's going to try to do all the things it does, and I mean, it will fail to list them. Now, you could potentially remove like the create permission if then you never create a gateway, and then it will never try to create something else. But you can't remove the list permission at least, because that's always going to happen.
But John, the gateway API doesn't say anything. I mean, it's a single cluster API. It's an official, upstream gateway API. It doesn't say anything about secrets in different clusters. That's something we did for our own previous reasons, designs.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that if you remove the permission that Istio is not going to try and read the secret.
No. I'm saying we could add a flag that tells Istio.
Oh, sure, we could add in. Yeah,
that's a proper way to, and then remove the cross secret, because that's huge security risk.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to get at. How do we do it if user wants to disable it? Right now, there's no flag, right?
Yeah, it needs to add a flag.
Yes, and the Gateway API does say the secret should be in the same cluster as the gateway itself. So if you have a central Istio, then you do need to read the secrets from their cluster.
If you have central Istio, yeah, but then you will enable it in central Istio, not in each Istio approach. I mean, because the blast radius, if you don't have central Istio, means that in any cluster is compromised and you get the secrets across the entire mesh, and that's pretty nasty.
Yeah, it's really not that we should have a setting for secrets in particular. We should have two different multi-cluster roles, right? One is for the minimum, and one is for when you have central or whatever we call it. I don't know if what it looks like exactly. But.
So what is good for central is not good for the other. So there are a lot of things that are best practices for one are different than best practice. So we should have flags for, and do kind of more thorough analysis review of anything that crosses cluster boundary for the case is not central, and the other way around.
When you say central, that's external. It could.
Sorry, external. Yeah, I forgot the name.
Actually, we do have one for external.
We have a flag that doesn't affect secrets.
No, it does that. But it doesn't affect secrets because secrets is actually not related to that. It's to implement the Istio gateway here. Sorry, everything I said before I think was confusing because I didn't fully understand it. So the secrets part is because of Istio gateway, and we don't have a mode to disable Istio gateway support. So that's, I think, the root cause of the secret issue.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing. You can disable it. Yeah.
But we're talking about Istio gateway, not the new gateway, right?
Wait, the Istio gateway, I thought it doesn't support you read the secrets across different namespace. Only the Kubernetes gateway supports that.
But that namespace isn't relevant to the roles. Istio still needs to read all the namespaces in that regard. I thought we were talking about clusters.
Yeah, the old Istio, that's again going back to ambient. If we restrict, when ambient we can restrict and make changes. But yeah, I agree. I mean, still users, even if the API says that Istio gateway will read from across, they may say, okay, forget about this. I want more security rather than compatibility, and intentionally secure.
Yeah, I think why I was confused is there's actually 3 different modes that Istio can operate in. It can operate in external Istio D, where it's doing everything for that cluster. It can serve XDS, where it needs a bit more info, like secrets, and it needs to do token reviews and things like that. Or it can just strictly read config from there, like endpoints. And at that point, it needs less. So what we're missing is a middle section where we're just reading endpoints as a mode, which is like the primary versus remote, or whatever we call it these days. And I actually think that was, at the time, intentional that there was no setting for that, because we wanted it to be kind of like just add clusters here and there and wherever it goes, and has unfortunate implications on the RBAC roles. I think it's completely unrelated to namespaces of secrets, though, which still needs the cluster role regardless.
Yeah, definitely. John, if you misunderstand and have trouble understanding this, what hope do users have?
Wow. If you don't worry about the security, it works fine.
And that's what Mesh is doing. So.
So should we write something about this? It sounds like it's pretty confusing.
Definitely we should write it, because it's clearly not ideal, but also since it may be a backward incompatible change, I still think the defaults for ambient should be secure and should reflect the better understanding. And for the old one, we need to have opt-in flags, because it's a huge risk to change this kind of stuff, because who knows who's using it.
So John, maybe I can start write something, and then you and Carsten can correct me if my understanding is correct. Then we can look at
what are we trying to write or solve?
Well, we're trying to understand the space. First of all, sounds like you have your own understanding, and this is we're trying to understand how the secrets are used, and should we have flags to guard them? Is that your understanding?
Yes, the secret usage is quite clear, though. The gateway can read secrets in any namespace. Now, that may contradict with what you think I said earlier, but it's because the gateways themselves can live in any namespace. So even if the gateway can only read within its own namespace, that namespace is arbitrary and not related to Istio D. So Istio D needs to be able to read secrets from all namespaces, even if an individual gateway can only read from one namespace. So anytime Istio D is serving XDS to a workload that is potentially a gateway in a cluster, it needs access to the secrets in that cluster.
Okay, I missed that. Okay, so basically the gateway can deploy in any namespace, which is why it has a cluster-wide get and list and watch secrets.
Yes.
Because whichever namespace it's deployed, it needs full permission for secrets for that. At least be able to read and list. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, you could add arbitrary restrictions on top of Istio, like I only allow gateways in these two namespaces, and then give only access to those two namespaces. But it's not actually a limitation of Istio. That's something you add on top, and it's actually quite hard in Kubernetes to watch multiple namespaces instead of all or none or one. There actually is a mode in Istio. Well, never mind. Go ahead, Costin.
But we're discussing multi-cluster access, not single cluster access. That was a dangerous one.
I think the confusing part is I think Lynn was actually, to some extent, talking about single cluster access and really about the cross namespace, whereas then we were talking about cross cluster. So, or both.
Right,
I don't know.
That's the confusion. Yes, for single cluster, I think it's pretty clear now. For multi-cluster, maybe not so much because we have like a multi-primary, primary remote. We also have external control plane.
Yeah. By the way, one last note since we beat this topic to that, there is the spec, the new spec technically doesn't require the gateway to get certificates from secrets only. It's a reference to an object. So theoretically, it could be something external, like an external cert manager, Vault, or whatever. It could be something else, which we don't currently support, but at some point it may be useful if we want to integrate with Vault or more secure storages for secrets.
I agree that it could and should, but that doesn't mean that we can remove the secret watching either. The secret is core.
No.
Yeah, it's addition, not replacement.
The cluster secret, yeah, absolutely, but the multi-cluster, we can remove it. Not remove it, optional, make it optional.
Okay, probably move on. Oh shoot, I forgot I was up. Share my doc. Sorry, I never shared it. Maybe actually we can go to the next topic, and I'll do mine last while I work to share it.
Panorama.
Hey, hi Francis. Hey. So this is mostly what we discussed already on the June 14th WG meeting. So this is regarding fetching the Envoy generic secrets. So currently only TLS secrets are being fetched, are only able to be fetched to the SDS. So this was a proposal to allow basic generic secrets. Currently the OAuth2 filter does use that, the Envoy filter. And in the future, I see that this can be used with the WASM extensions as well. I also saw one issue around the WASM extensions that talks about fetching the secrets. So this mostly, I wanted to understand, since this PR was mostly in the stale state, what can we do, or do you see any challenges in moving it forward? Because right now the security posture that it has is on the line with the current security posture of the SDS API. But if there is anything that comes to anyone's mind, this is kind of something that we would want at that rate. So if any comments are there, please.
Yeah, I'm not concerned with type. I mean, I think it's okay to watch for other types of secrets, but maybe with this occasion we do some extra review because of previous discussion to make sure that the secrets we access have a strict, user clearly allows whoever is reading it to get it, like as a gateway reference or some explicit RBAC permission or something else that is not broadly arbitrary secrets with any name and any type.
Right, Costin. So I think for SDS specifically, we add a role binding in the namespace for the API, and unless the RBAC permission is already there for the reading the secrets, it will not go forward. So
to be clear, which SDS you are talking about? You are talking about the Istio DSDS, or you're talking about
Istio DSDS? Yes.
Istio DSDS, Istio reads all the secrets as we discussed. How do you know that a particular pod is allowed or not allowed to access a particular secret? Because
Yeah,
you are
through the RBAC permit.
Oh, so we check RBAC. Okay.
Yes, we check RBAC. That is the current security posture, and this PR or the proposal itself doesn't try to break the same. It follows the same.
Yeah, but I feel like the current way is everyone agrees is bad though and is wrong. So I'm a bit worried about extending that for new things. We only did it for backwards compatibility, really. Like Quat mentioned in one of his comments on here, like this actually doesn't correctly implement RBAC. It's just close enough that it was good enough at the time when we had to make changes in 1.6. I don't know. I mean, I get that it's a current state, so it's easy to add more things to it, but we could also probably do better here. There's also been a lot of comments from Rama and Quat about saying that we shouldn't do this. Neither of them are here. So I feel even if we in this meeting say that we should do it, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should go ahead and just merge the PR as is. I don't know. Like I feel like their comments haven't necessarily really been addressed.
The comments were mostly around the questions regarding the security aspect of the same. And I agree that the current method we would want to change in the future, but that would apply to everything that we are doing through STS API with the RBAC policies. The Quad comment was mostly around that there could be other policies as well in the play, in that maybe a ABAC policy or something. But right now, do we want, like I wanted to understand, not push through the approval of the PR. I want to understand if what should we be adding here to.
Yeah, I feel like you're kind of not responding to the comments on the PR directly. Like the thing that I keep hearing, which is perfectly valid, is that this is just extending the existing mechanisms and it's not changing, all the checks that we do and whatnot against them. So it's perfectly fine. But that's not at all what the comments are really saying. They're saying that this is the wrong way to serve OAuth secrets to Envoy, and here's alternatives, and here's why it's the wrong way. And I don't see that those are necessarily addressed. Now, I'm no expert on OAuth, so I don't have, very much opinion myself, but I do note that these comments don't seem to be really acknowledged at all.
But technically, I mean, I think what there are two different issues. I mean, should SDS serve generic secrets? I don't think anyone is saying that it should not serve generic secrets. What everyone is saying is that the RBAC permission checks for serving secrets they're not good as they are, and before extending this, what we have, we should fix it instead of saying because we did something wrong.
I don't know that's what they're saying. I think Quat's saying that Istio should not be in the business of serving arbitrary secrets. And it seems like even, I don't mean to call you out, but my interpretation of your comment is actually that you were suggesting the agent reads the secret directly, not through Istio D. Is that still true?
Yeah, because that will solve most of the security problems. But again, it's a matter of it's still SDS, it's still arbitrary secrets, but that solves the security problems because the agent, it's enforced by Kubernetes, and whatever agent is granted permission can read. So it's the same thing as reading directly from a gateway the secret.
Yeah, and it seems like Quat and Rama were also suggesting something similar, that it's read from SDS, but not served by Istio D. It's read by something else. I don't think they meant the agent. I think they meant a third thing, because SDS, it can integrate with anything, right?
Sure, John. So basically, I think I missed acknowledging the same on the PR, but I synced with Rama and Quat offline, and they suggested that to have a separate service for this. But my question here remains that we will be adding another service in the data path of the request. So, for example, for OAuth to filter that is serving the secret. Yeah.
I don't know if it's well or I mean it's a secret, but to get a secret from Kubernetes, all you need to is to read the JWT token and make a curl request. I mean, you don't need the whole API library, you don't need the service. So from WASM, it should be pretty easy to make a call to get a secret. You don't need to kind of compile the entire Kubernetes API libraries into WASM. So maybe we should just talk directly with API server. It's a HTTP REST API, and it's super easy to get secrets without a heavy library, and simplify, not introduce another service.
Probably. I mean, that adds another dependency on the Kubernetes API server availability for the service to be available. Basically, we want this in Istio because Istio is already in the data path of the request. And but adding another service or making the dependency on the API server just makes it vulnerable to, has more leak. Basically, we will be relying on API server or any other service, which we might or might not want to maintain as a P0 service.
Where do you think Istio is getting the secrets from?
I mean, yeah, Istio is getting the secrets from there.
In fairness, Istio will read it once and cache it, and the proxy make go up and down.
How big can the secrets be? If people, I mean, I know Helm is using secrets to store save state. Do we want to keep all? I mean, we probably already do so.
Well, we already do it. Actually, we technically filter out the Helm ones specifically because it was a big problem. But yeah.
And hopefully we filter currently just the ones. So we need to take into account size as well if we use Istio and kind of this read all the secrets in memory because it's more convenient.
I agree, Costin, but do you see any other way? Like right now, adding another service like what or Rama mentioned is something that we are not allowing, not trying to do basically because of the same problem that I discussed just now.
What is wrong with the agent? I mean, why do they want another service, not agent?
Oh, another service, but not agent.
I mean, Istio agent is in the path is there. It's used for a lot of things. It's
so this is mostly right. I may not have the best idea about the Istio agent and the STS, but this is regarding the gateway. So gateway, changing anything regarding the agent there. And eventually maybe we want this to be present at the sidecar as well.
No, gateway also has an agent. So gateway, as a workload entity, they get their certificates from SDS in the agent. SDS is implemented in the agent.
So do you see that? Okay, I thought I remember that one issue that we had. I think Istio agent probably likes to have the secret warm up before starting the proxy.
Yeah, and also there is a Spiffy Spire agent that is also running on the node that could get secrets as well.
Okay, is it dynamic in nature, like on the runtime? Sorry, I'm not very knowledgeable around that, but yeah, I'm just asking in the sense that if that is something probably more secure, then I will pivot in that direction. Before that, is it valid to move into that direction? Yeah.
Let's discuss it in the bug, but I think the consensus seems to be that we are concerned about the secrets permission in Istio, and it is a high bar to meet to put it in Istio.
Yeah, my current thinking after rereading this and previous discussion, like I see the utility of this. It's also highly risky. It needs to be well thought out, and it's to support something that is not part of Istio. Actually, OAuth 2 is not part of Istio core. It's an extension. So it seems like to support extensions of Istio and using Istio's extension mechanisms is more appropriate. There's like 20 different ways you can solve this without changing Istio, right? You can mount the secrets. You can have a custom STS agent. You can fetch it from directly from the API server, like Costa mentioned. You can fetch it from another service, which fetches from the API server if you want it to be cached. Like there's all sorts of ways to solve this that don't require changing Istio. And I'm not super comfortable with changing Istio in a very, very, very security sensitive way to support these non-core features that have plenty of viable and, in fact, even more secure solutions.
But John, is it really changing anything on the security aspect that is currently not there? So for the TLS cert as well?
Yes, I mean, we've added 200 lines of code that are exposing secrets to proxies.
And And you are making it difficult to remove the code that is currently bad. So at some point, because we all agree that it's not ideal what we have.
We've had many CVEs around this code too, so it's fairly sensitive.
Okay. Would something like Costin mentioned on the Istio agent would be more applicable here?
I didn't want to argue against that because I thought it would go off the rails, but I don't think that's the best idea, personally. But it's also, I think Costin just mentioned something in the pod fetching something. You could just as easily run a sidecar that sits in a loop, makes a curl request, and saves the file to disk and then load it. Like that's 10 lines of YAML with no changes to Istio. Or you could do it in the Envoy itself and something, WASM plugin, whatever you want. Like there's all sorts of ways you can solve this without changes to Istio.
Sure.
Yeah,
Like loading secrets it's something core to Kubernetes, right? Where Istio is not unique in that an application needs access to secrets. There's 100 methods to serve secrets to pods. There's CSI drivers, there's secret mounts, there's sidecars, there's init containers, there's all these methods. I don't know why we can't use those instead of making changes to the core of Istio. Now, there's reasons why we did it this way in Istio, which is namely that we had to conform with specs of APIs. And maybe we made bad decisions there, but we made them. But that doesn't really apply here, I feel like.
Sure. I mean, probably if in the near future, we never want to play around with any service that requires such kind of secrets, then I understand. But I just want to gather your views if we can modify this. If this is even an acceptable idea, then we modify this to conform to the security standards and then.
I think the consensus is that we don't want to change Istio to support this, and that there's many ways that you can do this without changes to Istio, and that we're very happy to help set those up. Is that where you're thinking, Costin?
I changed my mind. I completely agree with you.
Oh,
We
okay.
should actually, I mean, and I agree with Quatten. I mean, a separate service that is dealing with SDS and secrets is probably the safest, and then change Istio to kick out whatever we have and move it to this service. I mean, I know that, you know, I argued for monoliths and other things, but secrets is one case where having a clean service instead of the mammoth that is Istio full with all the other stuff, it's probably a good idea. And
I mean, you don't even need SDS. You could also just use file mounts, right?
Or some simpler protocol.
So you're saying maybe something like if we don't want another service in the data path, maybe we can have a sidecar which can talk to API server, get the secret, mount it as a file path.
I mean, you can. I guess you don't want to mount it normally because you want to do it dynamically, huh?
No, but
SDS
is not the only way to fetch a secret. I mean, you can use a regular GET request. You can use a regular, you know, with you know, MTLS and with authentication, you know, credentials of the workload. So it's you don't have to necessarily use XDS just to fetch a file.
Okay.
You can use Vault directly from. I mean, why? I mean, it wouldn't be better to be able to integrate with Vault Secret Manager, Manage Secret Managers, and other solutions instead of just having this crazy, you know, secret stored in cluster. So a service that is specialized in as an intermediary between external managed secure secret storages and applications would be generally useful for everyone, not only for Istio.
Sure. Just one more thing on the WASM thing. So once we want WASM plugins to also have fetch secrets, is that something we want to face when it comes to that, or like?
WASM works very well to make HTTP requests to a cluster. So if you have a service that does a GET with you know, checking the MTLS credentials, it would work perfectly from WASM with few lines of code.
Okay, I'm not sure if something like a client Go library could be implemented using WASM, but I'm not an expert on WASM. But yeah, if that is possible, then yeah, it should be fine.
WASM has a GET method. I mean, you can make HTTP requests to other services. That's what I meant.
Okay. Sure. I think then the consensus is basically not moving forward with this and trying to think of more solutions. Sure. Thanks, folks, for discussing this.
Cool. I got the chance to share my doc, so we can actually look at that now. This is fairly, well, I'd say it's incomplete. I meant to get to it for this meeting. I forgot that I put it on the agenda, so there'll probably be more we can add and talk about later, but there's probably enough for at least overview. So I've been starting to think a lot about the kind of control plane observability, which I consider to be logs, metrics, and traces, and kind of, we have logs, we have metrics, but they're haphazard. Some of the logs are useful, some of them are too noisy, some of them are confusing. Most of them are unstructured, so they're hard to kind of process. We have metrics, but they're vary from super useful to very unuseful, violating Prometheus standards and common sense, extremely expensive, like all these sorts of issues. There's no real consistency between everything. It's quite hard to observe what's happening in Istio if you're not an expert. So the goal of this was kind of to look at everything holistically and kind of drive the path forward of how we should handle all three of these in kind of a consistent way that's good for users and developers. Oh, and I forgot to mention there's a lot of new evolution going on in this space in Go. So it's also about taking advantage of those. So the current state, we only have logs and metrics, like I mentioned. We have our own logging library, and it's usually written to standard out. We do have structured logging, which, if you're not familiar, is just structures of like key value pairs rather than just an opaque string, which of course becomes an opaque string when we log it. But if you're in use a JSON node, for example, it becomes actual keys in the JSON thing. So it can be parsed by various logging tools, or even just like JQ or whatever. Metrics, when I wrote this, it was in OpenCensus, but now we've actually moved over to the OpenTelemetry SDK, and it exports to Prometheus. So that's kind of the current status. We don't have traces at all. So if you could scroll down a bit to standards. So the first thing I wanted to look at is, yeah, we almost never use a structured form. That is very true. Even in new logs, it's not just old logs. So one of the goals, like I mentioned, is a good experience for developers where they're actually encouraged and or forced to use best practices instead of not, as we do today. So first is like looking at what kind of standards we should be using. In Go, I think it's become very apparent that the two standards that matter are OpenTelemetry and slog. OpenTelemetry technically does metrics, logs, and traces, but the logging is like alpha or experimental or something. And slog is kind of meant to be the standard interface for all logs in Go and can have different backends. So if we wanted to, we could add an OpenTelemetry backend to slog, for example. So I still think using slog as kind of the core is useful. And then for metrics and traces, there's really no alternative to OpenTelemetry for kind of consistent standards. The nice thing about both these is they hook up to various backends. So they're kind of these neutral interface libraries, and then you plug in the backend. So for Istio's code, we don't have to worry about Prometheus or whatever. We just use the standard libraries, and then some part of the code at the very start sets up what the backend should be, which I'm proposing that by default, we export metrics to Prometheus, logs to standard out, and traces to OTLP. This should be non-controversial given that the first two are exactly the same. OTLP, if you're not familiar, is the new OpenTelemetry reporting protocol. It's kind of where everything is consolidating for traces. Costas standard out in JSON or KH format. I would say not JSON format as the default, just to match what we have today. We already have a flag. Maybe we very strongly push users towards the flag to turn on JSON mode, though. I don't mind that.
Maybe for ambient we can swap the flag because, yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So now the next thing is like users may not use Prometheus or whatever. They may have their other backends like Datadog or Stackdriver or Grafana Cloud or whatever. The nice thing about these is that they can still be extended to work with these via two mechanisms. One would be, I don't know, there's probably a better name for it, but downstream collection, if you could scroll down a bit, which is basically all these, the three of these are very easy to have some intermediate thing, read them, and then export somewhere else. So for example, you could have, in the example for all three, I use the OpenTelemetry collector since it's designed for this, but you could have it scrape Prometheus and export to wherever, scrape the standard out report to wherever, or receive the OTLP report to wherever. If you're not familiar with OTel collector, the log could be something like FluentD or whatever. Like everyone has something that's scraping standard out logs and exporting somewhere, so it's kind of the same process. OpenTelemetry collector is just kind of a newer way to do that for all different types of observability. So the key point really is that even though Istio is just exporting these kind of standard ones, you can still completely integrate with whatever you need to. And it's not Istio's problem. It's your problem to deal with. And it's a very common pattern to do this. This is also what the Kubernetes control plane does. Actually, basically, this entire doc is copied from Kubernetes. So it's nothing really unique here. There is another option as well if someone is building Istio themselves and they don't like collectors for some reason. Because everything is built on extensions and extensibility, in theory, someone could fork Istio and have a very small one line of code injecting to replace the handler. I don't know that we want to encourage that too much, but it's also like we can't really stop it. Like these libraries are designed to be plugged in. So vendors are free to do that if they want. I know, for example, like today, we have, or actually we had, I just removed it recently, some built-in Stackdriver code, for example. If someone wanted to add that in, they could do that in their own build. But Istio and open source won't have other handlers except for these in the core. Okay, I've said a lot of words. I have a bit more to get through, but let me pause if there's any questions. Okay, I'll continue. The other thing I'm looking at is kind of the stability of these. We don't really commonly think of them this way, but really all of these are user-facing APIs. Like their entire purpose is to be looked at by humans or tools. And so having some guarantees is useful. And that involves the protocols, but also the names, the levels of logging we do, what we log, how we log it, the semantics of them, for example. Now, unfortunately, I think it's hard to just go and propose, hey, all logging should be stable. Like, we need flexibility, at least at this point in time in our project, to be able to change logs. The same goes for traces. I think traces has more potential to be stable, but we have zero tracing right now. So committing to being stable in traces is kind of nonsense at this point. So I kind of propose that we start explicitly documenting the stability of these, but we call out logging and tracing as unstable. But for metrics, I think we should start to offer guarantees around. Basic structure of trace is stable. I agree that basics of tracing is stable, and it's easier to make traces stable than logs, but at the same time, like, we have zero tracing, so I don't want to commit to anything too early. But we should probably in the future make traces stable. Logs will likely be forever unstable. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we should be kind of more nuanced here. Few logs, like error warning. I mean, some select logs, audit logs, should probably become stable, accelerated.
Yeah.
Well, most of the logs, I agree. I mean, debug log, nobody care. Info log, probably nobody care. But at least some of the logs and some of the element in traces should be stable as much as possible.
Maybe, yeah. I see your point for sure. Like, one thing I think is that I think it's much more important for metrics to be stable, because metrics, then you can alert and then you go look at the logs. Like, if you're a human looking at something, stability is less important. And I think it's more likely that you have automated alerts on metrics and then human look at logs. But I could see that some logs being stable could be a possibility.
Yeah, no, I want to mention that at least in Google and probably most other environments, logs are actually the ones that are processed by all kind of pipelines and generate alerts much easier because they are kind of instantaneous and they also are structured. I mean, for example, audit logs and so there are more pipelines around log processing or stream processing of logs than around metrics.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, that's good to know. Okay. On metrics, I think we should basically get to a point where, like the rest of the project, it's up or out. So right now we don't define the stability of any metrics. So I had planned to have a list of all the metrics and kind of the state that I think we should put them in. I didn't quite get there, but we should do it eventually. But I think we should go categorize basically everything as deprecated or experimental or alpha. So some of the metrics I think are clearly bad and we should deprecate them. And by deprecate, I don't mean remove, but mark them as kind of, we will remove them in the future. We have a variety of metrics that are off by default. And this is usually because of performance concerns, which I think is likely already fixed by our change to use OpenTelemetry. OpenCensus performance was pretty terrible. And then everything else would go to alpha. I think we should very quickly move to promote some of the existing metrics out of alpha, but it seems, and it could even be in the first release. This would be just the way to start. And basically, I would encourage that we are, just like we do with other features, well, just like we try to do with other features, we work to move metrics from alpha to stable and kind of codify around these and have proper process around these. Right now we have about 150 metrics and they're quite haphazard. So adding some more structure and review and making sure we're consistent in usage, et cetera, I think would go a long way. Yes, good point, Costin, that a lot of this could be kind of broken down as part of the ambient transition. Okay, moving on. So one thing that's a big part of OpenTelemetry and slog is attributes, which is basically what they call like the keys and values. So OTel has a set of what they call the semantic conventions, which is basically just a bunch of names for things. So like they actually define like, here's how you should represent a Kubernetes namespace. It's like k8s.namespace or something. And all the different types can use these. So logs, use them as the keys for the structured logs. Traces, use them as attributes, and metrics as labels. So I think we should kind of strive to use these consistently. Like today when we log a Kubernetes resource, which we do all the time, we have like so many different ways of logging it. These are just some examples. I'm sure we have like way more. It would be quite nice if these were all consistent. You could do things like, I want to see all info about this virtual service, and you just do a search for that thing. And some of the help, we could probably add some helpers for things like, we often have config objects. We could, instead of having them think about the key and value, we could do something like this. The details will work out, obviously. Just things that make it easier to do the right thing so that you're not constantly trying to think of like, what should the key for this thing be? You just say, I want to log this config object, and we handle the formatting for you. We could probably have a better interface than this, but there's just an example. Yeah, I'm going to go faster because we're running out of time, and I think this is mostly just meant to be an overview anyways. This just goes a bit into structured logging and kind of pushing for doing this in more places and how we should do it. So just a simple example, like here's a real log in Istio. Well, it's simplified, but basically a real log. This is how you'd write it with structured logging. It's just as easy, I think, possibly easier because you don't have to think about the formatting. You just kind of log a bunch of key value pairs. And useful for users. The other thing that's nice about it is instead of doing things like this, where you have to constantly remember to add the keys in the right spot and like kind of consistently use them, you can actually make new loggers that have the values already embedded in them. So you can then pass that around to lower functions in the stack, or just, even within a single function if you're logging the same thing over and over again. This is really helpful, I think, in, like, for example, we have the big controller, that multi-cluster controller for the services. We could just set up a logger that says the cluster ID in the struct of the controller. And if we consistently use that, then we know that every single log emitted by the controller will say what cluster it's running for. Whereas today, we get all these logs like, a new service, but it's like, what cluster is this from? I have no idea. Yeah, go ahead, Qasim.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, for logging in particular, Elasticsearch vocabulary has been used for quite a while, and it's a very old product, and it's aligned with OpenTelemetry semantic conventions. They announced that they are kind of merging the two standards, and for people who use Elasticsearch, it would be very nice to have the same vocabulary.
Yep. Yep, definitely agree. Cool. Last thing, probably the last thing, tracing. For those that haven't used OTel, this is what a typical trace would look like. Basically, I mean, usually you're tracing a function, kind of. So you would start at the start of a function, say that you're starting the function. It doesn't have to be the function name, but I use that here. It's some attributes, and then once the function ends, you report the span as ended. The important part is that the context is overridden, and then as you pass it down to subfunctions, they become kind of nested, and then you get the nice traces rather than just a bunch of discrete logs, really. This is not terribly complicated. The one thing that's fairly interesting, I think, is that we don't really use context anywhere in Istio. If we're starting to trace, you need to propagate context. So adopting traces broadly in Istio may require decent number of changes in terms of context propagation, which we'll need to consider. That's about it. Let's see. There's some other info here, but I think that's all we have for today. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask them quickly now or on the doc. This is definitely not complete, just trying to start getting an overview, and then we can slowly start to move towards doing this in Istio. And again, this is only for the control plane. There's some other discussion about OpenTelemetry for the data plane, which is very useful and interesting, but not the purpose of this doc. So. For listening to me talk for 20 minutes. Cool. See you all in the next meeting, maybe.